gay. It's difficult to know exactly what order to put all these things on. Miles has looked through several of the things I've done before, some of which I've forgotten. Apparently one of them met with general disapproval. I would imagine that's the one about race. But we must all really look carefully at ourselves and at the way the world still is. There are some wonderful people out there who are completely untouched by the West. And anyone who has met them have felt, let's hope they don't have any more, that they stay the way they are. Because they are happy with themselves. I thought the other day we were losing everything in this country with this great flood of people coming to this country. And I went down to Devon and I went to the folk festival and it was so lovely. Anyway, we, all of us, are very precious and very special, and we're all on our way. So it's really important for us to know that. And at the moment, the tossers at the top are very busy trying to persuade us that we must all mix ourselves up like a big pudding. And it will be a mess if we do. And I'm about to read you this thing about experiments they can do with the simple frog, which will explain what they want us to know. If we want to go forward with a really strong, healthy race on this planet, without mental illness, without fatness, without sickness, we must try to notice much more about our families, where we've come from, who we are, and really make an effort to try and find somebody who's like ourselves, but with the help, I think, of scientists. And hopefully with the knowledge that I'm putting out, some of that will happen. So let me read you this thing about the frog, which I've just lost. No, here it is, right. The simple frog and how it applies to the development of the human being in the very early stages of that development. This is my comment. We've reached the stage now in our planet when, whether we know it or not, most of us have bodies that are of very mixed racial descent. And those in power are actively encouraging us to destroy ourselves further by featuring mixed-race couples with mixed-race children in all films and adverts. In fact, the white races in their own country are being written out of the scripts. The reason for this the reason why this is such a disaster is that race is not a random thing. It's a ladder that all of us must climb. Every race is precious, has its own blood types, brain patterns, and electrical frequencies. We all have our own complex cultures and tradition which bring us joy, and we should be suited to the race we are born into. We are also members of families, not only in this life, but we belong to family clans who protect the living and govern our lives after death also. Many of these have been lost. And there's no doubt about it, when people marry out of their race, and then maybe another and another, they lose it altogether, and their lives are much less happy. They don't know where they belong. Consequently, we're not only breaking up our family clans and their benign influence over us, and in the process we are making ourselves sicker, fatter, and much less happy. And almost all in the Western world have had to have some sort of surgery by the time we reach middle age, or even before. The following chapter explains how scientists can do experiments with frogs' eggs that will show how the mixing of those eggs of totally different frogs will cause all sorts of problems with the development of the frog, and how this applies to what is happening to humanity also. So this is the dictation on the frog. As we've already mentioned to you, the frog is a very simple little creature, but very few people who look at these extraordinary creatures and examine the way in which their male and female cells grow together ever bother to think to themselves how terribly similar they are to the human being, except, of course, that the two male and female adult creatures do not tend their young in very many of their species, do not have sexual intercourse together as human beings do, although the male and female do mate in a sort of way that can be likened to human beings. However, if the female and male sex cells of the frog egg are placed together by scientists in as natural way as possible in water, which is their natural element, and placed under a microscope not less than 1,000 times magnification, we should like a small film to be made of what will be seen to be happening. And this is a very important piece of research we would like your scientists to consider very carefully. As we have said already, people in your world are already conducting experiments which are only a carry-on from the ancient times of Leonardo da Vinci and others of this time, who really had very little knowledge and only observed those things that were absolutely obvious and easy for any intelligent person to observe for themselves. As we have said already, everything, and this includes plants and animals and even the planet itself, works by electricity. And this is, of course, the same for the frog. The frog, this simple little creature in its earliest possible development, once the male cell has invaded the female cell and joined together, it unites in exactly the same way as the human cells do. And this is very important. It's therefore unnecessary to take human cells and experiment with them, because any experiment with human cells can cause terrible, awful distress in any number of ways, which we will explain in another dictation in the future. And these are the facts we want known. Once the two cells have joined themselves together, it will be seen that the two nuclei become one, or it would seem that they become one. What happens is the minute particles of microorganisms begin to form very rapidly within the basic nucleus and start to rush about in all sorts of directions, and this will become clear when seen under very large magnification. It will be interesting to take two frogs which are of the same type and under magnification watch their two cells, sex cells, and how they start to work together. Subsequently, take the sex cells of two completely different frogs, one from, say, England and one from Africa or some other completely different part of the world. Their cells, under the right conditions, will join together in just the same way as the two frogs that are of the same breed. But in the end, you will get a very peculiar-looking frog, which is half of something and half of one, like half of one parent and half the other. All sorts of experiments must be done to prove that what we are saying about genealogy and how it works. It's already been seen how two very clever and expert surgeons who have medical experience and an interest in butterflies made all sorts of interesting discoveries about the genetics with their experiments on their butterflies. And although some of their findings have been proved correct, not all are strictly true, because it is the frog which is far, far nearer and more useful little creature when it comes to gaining knowledge on the genetics of humans. This little creature, which must be experimented with, will be found to develop very quickly and in a similar way in sex cells will be found to develop very quickly and in a similar way to the sex cells and the embryo form and how the embryo forms in human beings. Under a microscope, it will be seen how the tiny microscopic organisms react in the sex cells of the two frogs that are of the same parentage, and compare it with the two frogs of the different parentage. However, in the case of the two different sorts of frogs, whose bodies therefore work on an entirely different frequency, when the sex cells unite, the minute organisms within them repel one another. So you get all sorts of little circular motions building up, and the genes which develop within these minute organisms start to make all sorts of different patterns and shapes, totally different to those made by the frogs of the same breed. This is exactly what happens in the human being also. It is inevitable in any planet which is ignorant that you will after many centuries get a complex mix-up of nationalities, and it is this information that should have been given to your planet many, many centuries ago. Everyone knows the terrible massacres that have been happening all over your planet and the misery and displacement of populations that result. The way in which humanity is treated is really quite terrible and far, far from humane. When it happens that humanity has got so radically mixed up racially mixed up, that was meant to be, that a solution to the problem of placing it back into the races in which it belongs can no longer be achieved, then there can be only one way in which this situation is solved, and that is by destruction. And this is the only other way in which a humanity gradually destroys itself. In your planet, however, there are very many people who are still basically Saxon, Norman, or red-haired type of Saxon, because that is what the Norsemen and some Scotsmen really are, or members of the different Arab nations and tribes of black men. All of this information we hope to get into the world, and to show people by means of this book how the white races and some of the black and coloured races can not only come to very much greater happiness by sorting out the terrible problems of the mixture of race that has gone on from time immemorial. It can only be hoped that this information will be acted upon by the population of this planet themselves. So that's the end of that little dictation, but basically, it's up to us. If we want to believe it, that's up to us. If we don't, and we want to carry on making a mess of everything, it's up to us.